Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this brief video, I'm going to do a preview of the week starting on Monday, August the 11th, 2025. I will start by looking at the main astrological events taking place over the course of a week. And basically, I'll just be going over them very briefly. And having done that, I'm going to look at the I Ching. So I'm going to do an I Ching for the week with 4 sections, a general section, then money, then career and business, and finally relationships. So yeah, very quick video. And over the course of the next week in my daily videos, I'll be picking up on some of the points I mention in this video and going into them in more detail. So let's start by looking at the positions of the planets at the beginning of the week, sort of midnight New York time on Monday, August the 11th. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So here are the start positions, and the week starts with Mercury being still retrograde, sort of midnight New York time. But Mercury is about to go stationary direct. So Mercury has been moving retrograde for the last 3 weeks, and that's been sort of creating a few problems in its wake. But it's nearly over. And on Monday the 11th at 7:29 a.m. London time, Mercury comes to a standstill. So 7:29 a.m. London time, that was sort of 8:29 a.m. if you're in Europe, sort of the Monday evening if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And if you're in California, then Mercury will go stationary direct sort of late on Sunday the 10th. So that's a major event. And the thing about Mercury going stationary direct, as I said I think I said in my previous video, it's taking place shortly after a full moon. Now, it's tempting to see Mercury direct as being something positive, and I think in general it is. But when it's happening so close to a full moon, you could say that 2 changes are happening, one on top of another, and that might cause some turbulence in its wake. And for example, in terms of the markets, indices, perceptions about the economy. I'm not saying anything is going to happen. As always, This video is not for giving financial or investment advice, but it'd be interesting to see how the market fares at the beginning of the week. And then we move into Tuesday the 12th. We've got Saturn making a sextile to Uranus. That's it's quite a major aspect, Saturn sextile Uranus. It's 2 outer planets making that sextile. And the Saturn-Uranus cycle I regard as being pretty important. This is a sextile, so it might be about being able to put change on a stable footing. So Uranus would be change, perhaps revolutionary change, and then Saturn makes that sextile. And as I've sort of said in previous videos, Russia, for example, is very sensitive to the Saturn-Uranus cycle. So perhaps Russia is one country we should be looking at sort of in particular. And then we've also got Sun decile Jupiter on Tuesday. It's a minor aspect. I don't really want to go into it. It's basically about what we're trying to create, how we're trying to make the most of things. But I'll be looking at that aspect when I do my horoscope for video. But the most important aspect on the 12th is Venus conjunct Jupiter. So Venus conjunct Jupiter arguably is the best aspect in the book. So we've just had Mars opposition Saturn, and that's the worst aspect in the book, although Carter, the astrologer Carter in the mid 20th century, he was suggesting. I think he suggested that Mars opposition Jupiter is arguably one of the worst aspects, because Jupiter is not always a fortunate influence. But here we've got Venus conjunct Jupiter. We've got Jupiter in a very strong position here because Jupiter is in Cancer. It's in the sign of its exaltation, and it's conjunct a benefic Venus. And so Venus conjunct Jupiter may be about things working very well for us. It can be about good luck. But you always had to be careful with Jupiter because Jupiter expects you to do the work. So if you just assume with Venus conjunct Jupiter, that everything is going to be fine, well, it might not necessarily be fine. You cannot be complacent. And when you're talking about Venus and Jupiter, yes, they are the benefics, but they can be overindulgent. We might also be over-optimistic. And we might be creating huge expectations for ourselves. And interestingly, this Venus conjunct Jupiter is conjunct the United States' sun. So I've just been talking about sort of markets, and one thinks of Wall Street, and so Mercury stationary on top of the full moon might be one thing going on, but Venus conjunct Jupiter could be just optimism that things are going to be fine. And that may say something about the kind of pronouncements that the United States is putting out. But I suspect there is a dark side to Venus conjunct Jupiter. It can, of course, bring things into awareness. Something that has been developing suddenly manifests. So there is an alternative way of looking at it. But on the face of it, that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which is exact on Tuesday, is going to be of some importance. As far as that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is concerned, by the way, it is exact, to be precise, at 6:30 a.m. London time. So, in fact, if you're on the West Coast, Pacific Coast, California, Oregon, British Columbia, or Alaska, Hawaii, then that Venus conjunct Jupiter is going to be exact on Monday evening. Then Wednesday, Thursday, Venus makes another aspect, makes a semi-square to Uranus, and Venus semi-square Uranus, you could argue that it's just a continuation of the Venus conjunct Venus conjunct Jupiter. It's about maybe getting excited about things. Uranus, and of course Uranus is making a sextile to Saturn still, and so things can happen we weren't expecting. Venus is a planet of relationships. Perhaps relationships will take an interesting turn. Then on Friday, last time I looked, is the day on which Trump is going to have his meeting with Putin in Alaska. I mean, maybe he's changed the timing of that meeting, but as far as I know, Friday the 15th is when it's happening, and Mercury is sextile Mars on that day, and the moon in Taurus is sextile Venus in Cancer. In other words, Moon and Venus are in mutual reception, yes. So that might bode well for the meeting. But you can't just look at two aspects of Mercury sextile Mars. You can think a heated conversation, a constructive conversation with Moon sextile Venus as well. So, that might suggest the meeting with Trump will go well, but you've got to look at other things. And don't forget, it's interesting that Trump has just agreed to meet Putin just as Mercury is moving stationary direct. But astrology aside, I'm unconvinced that the war is just going to stop just like that. I think we shouldn't have too many expectations. And of course, Venus conjunct Jupiter at the beginning of a week may create unrealistic expectations. So there's stuff for me to talk about in my daily videos over the coming week. But now I want to turn to the I Ching. So do remember with this I Ching reading, it is for the week ahead, you do not have to be part of this reading. This reading is voluntary. I mean, of course, everything is voluntary to an extent, but if you don't want me to read to do your reading, you can just stop watching the video. It only applies to people watching the I Ching section of this video, and this underlines the point. But every oracle that one consults, it has to be voluntary. You go in through your own choice. So don't feel obliged to carry on watching this video. So this I Ching reading, it will have 4 sections: a general section, then money, and then career and business, and finally relationships. So I ask the question: what is the week starting on Monday, August the 11th, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 8, which is holding together. And so this hexagram is very sociable. It's about everyone we know, people who can be helpful. It can be about alliances, and it can be about support. And so, we shouldn't feel that we have to do things on our own. And we're reminded of that sort of old maxim. Was one of the founding fathers said, I forget who it was. Was it Benjamin Franklin? He's someone like that. Forgive me if I'm not being too exact on that, but said something like, we either hang together or we hang separately. So we don't want to be picked off on our own, and it's best to get as much support as possible. And as a group, we are going to be more effective. So if you have something you're worrying about, or something you want to get together, and you're wondering how to do it, try, if possible, not to do it alone. Find people who have a common interest with you. And so if there's something you're worried about, you're upset about, then as a group, you can be more effective as an individual. I'm interested in sort of local politics. So if there's something happening in your community or your city that you're not happy about, then go to a city council meeting, make public comments, but don't just do it on your own if possible. Try to get other people to do it. So if you have grievances, whatever they be, not necessarily just about local issues in the United States, but whatever those grievances are, try to find support. And don't try and sort of deal with the world on your own, because it's probably not going to work out, and you could just end up finding you're just taking on too much. Now, it's quite a hectic hexagram, this holding together, because it has a number of moving lines. And so we have the second line moving, we have the third line moving, and we have the fourth line moving. So the second line moving is we're starting to get it together. The second line, it's starting to work. We're starting to make connections, but we have to make sure that if we are making these connections, the reasons have to be right, and we have to think about our motives. Sometimes motives can be wrong. We can be in touch with people because we're only concerned about our own interests. We're not interested in the community. We're not interested in the collective. Or we might approach someone because we're thinking, oh, they might be useful. So we don't really care about them. It's just an attempt to advance our agenda. And the I Ching is really telling us that is not a good idea. Your motivations for seeking a union, for coming together with people should ideally be beyond yourself, and maybe should be for the community, for the collective. And then the third line moves. And the third line in the I Ching is often unfortunate. And this hexagram is no exception. And the problem with the third line is that, very simply, we might hold together with the wrong people. So we think that the way forward is to just be with people, anybody. It doesn't matter who they are, but it does matter. And there is a temptation to just find someone who's listening to what we're saying. We think, oh, that's great, and we haven't really thought it through. So there does need to be a bit of discernment here. You can't just hold together with anyone. You have to hold together with people that share your interests. And the first group of people you meet, your first ideas about holding together may not be right. And then the fourth line moves. So the fourth line is, because we count the lines from the bottom, first, second, third, fourth. So the fourth line, you move into the top trigram. So you've got a hexagram, which is 6 lines, which is composed of 2 trigrams, each one having 3 lines. So you move to the fourth line, and things change. Things do become more fortunate. So if we can just wait for the situation to change, and then we can really start to express ourselves and be listened to, and we can find the right group of people to be focusing on, and we can be quite open about it, and it might be a time to really sort of declare our loyalty. Now, this is not this hexagram holding together. It's not hierarchical. It's not about one person being better than another, or about leaders and followers. But you have to perhaps you have to declare what you want, where your loyalties lie, and you might expect the same from others. So there is a moment for union, for coming together with people, and you mustn't miss that moment. But you mustn't go in too early. Just because you have an idea, just because people are listening to you, doesn't mean that you should sign on a dotted line and think that that's it. Because the first attempts to meet people may not be particularly successful, and you might find that things just come to a standstill because other people in the end aren't on your wavelength. So do persevere. But in the end, with that fourth line moving, I do believe that you will find the right grouping to propel you forward. Now, all of this raises the question: when you've got a hexagram like holding together, it's very sociable, and not all of us are very sociable. Some of us are hermits, and or we don't want to mix with others. Now, you could say that holding together doesn't have to be about physical meetings. You can interact with people online, for example, and find kindred spirits. I mean, in the end, of course, you can find some terrible people online, and your first attempts might not be successful. But so that's one approach. But holding together ultimately could be about holding together in terms of everything you are. So if we move sort of beyond the group and to who you are and everything that you are, and sort of bringing together all of your talents, all your memories, everything that's happened in the past, perhaps the memories of other people. So you can perhaps hold together with relatives who might be long dead, friends who might be long dead. People hang around. They, at the very least, hang around in your mind. And so if you can hold together with the past and people from the past, groupings from the past, and it could be that the past gives you some integrity. So, I mean, that is an alternative interpretation. So don't feel that this hexagram doesn't apply to you just because you have no social connections. I mean, everyone has social connections to some extent. For myself, I would regard myself as not quite a hermit, but I'm not a particularly sociable person. On the face of it, it might be difficult for someone like me to work with this hexagram holding together. But you have to think about everything you have, everything you are, everything that has formed your present can be brought together. Don't forget anything, and also don't get caught by the wrong examples, by the wrong memories. So there is a way to find sort of integrity and to bring everything together, regardless of your situation. Now, we do move to a second hexagram with all those moving lines, and we move to hexagram number 28, which is preponderance of the great. And this is quite a heavy hexagram. You look at it, you've got four unbroken lines in the middle, with some very short handles. It can be quite a tough hexagram, and it can represent a burden that is really very heavy. And so holding together is all very well, but if you do hold together, if you are involved with other people in some sort of joint project, it might be a lot to handle. Now, it could be a lot to handle because you're having to do most of the work. Even if you're not doing most of the work, you maybe have committed yourself to quite a heavy project, and there may be times when it may seem hopeless, but it's just too much. Preponderance of the great, it can be an overwhelming hexagram, but it's especially overwhelming if it's a starting off hexagram. When it's the first hexagram, you get preponderance of a great with moving lines, and in the I Ching, if there's any hexagram that is associated with death, it is preponderance of the great. You could argue that there's imagery with the preponderance of the great connected to sort of coffins and so forth, because you've got perhaps a big weight and you can see a coffin being borne aloft here. I mean, I'm not saying this is about death, but it provides a seriousness here, and it may be when all is said and done, when you realize what you're actually committing to, that something has changed, and that you're having to deal with something potentially alone, and because other people are not necessarily too bothered, or they're not bothered enough. And so you're going to have to make sure that if you've got support with holding together, that support continues. You do not want to take the pressure on your own. And also I just feel with preponderance of the great, there is that seriousness, and it is a new burden, and it's a burden you can carry. And I'm not talking about some emotional burden. It's more about what you have to do to move from one stage to the next. So that's the general picture. And turning to money, with holding together, you shouldn't necessarily assume that you have to make all of the decisions. That's the first point. You can get advice from other people. So if you're concerned about money, and money is really bothering you, then don't necessarily feel that you have to do everything on your own. You can get support. It's definitely there if you ask for it. And holding together might also be a situation where you find that you're having to pay for everything, and other people are not pulling their weight. Holding together can be about asking for contributions. If something is benefiting a larger group of people, then make sure everyone contributes. And so that that may be one aspect of this hexagram, but it does seem that financially, when everything is coming together, and it may not just be about other people, it may be about your resources and bringing together everything you've got, and all the people So if you've got an accountant, for example, make sure you talk to the accountant. Okay, you don't have to pay for an accountant if you don't have to, but just get advice, or it may be someone that has information or knowledge about your finances that you're not especially sure about. And we do have a few moving lines here, and the second moving line, you have to be careful here, because you might perceive that another person or another grouping can help you financially, but you don't want to give the impression that you're only thinking about yourself. You might, if you're not careful, give the impression that you're only thinking about money, that you're only thinking about your own financial interests, and that would not be a good idea. And then we've got the third line moving. So third line moving is talking about other people, and it is potentially talking about getting the wrong advice, because in a general sense, the third line is about hanging out with the wrong people. And when we translate that to a financial setting, people have all sorts of ideas about what you should do with your money, and there is this danger that the first people you ask advice from, they tell you something that really is not helpful, and they don't have your financial best interests at heart. So don't just rush to the first, if you've got something that needs to be done financially, don't just seek out the first person you can think of, because they may not necessarily be helpful. And also, some people can have some very disturbing ideas about what one should do with money, and this doesn't necessarily apply just to people. It might, how do you get financial advice? There are lots of books on the market that can tell you how to sort out your money, and the first book you read might not be very useful. And in the end, we move to the fourth line, and the fourth line moving, fourth moving line, that does indicate that in the end, perhaps through trial and error, you can find the right level of support. And if you look at everything you are, everything you've done in the past, you can see the line forward, what you should be doing. And you will find people who will be able to give you good advice. And don't forget, it's not just about advice, it's about what one does with money. It could be about pooling money, collecting money. It could be something relatively trivial, about something has to be paid for, and you want everyone to contribute, because perhaps everyone is benefiting, so it's not fair that one person has to deal with everything. And so in the end, you can find the right way of getting everyone to cooperate. And then we do move to a different hexagram, and it does seem that despite your best efforts with money, and I think that you're trying to get support, you're trying to get cooperation, despite your best efforts, there may still be a lot of pressure on you, because we move to 28, which is a preponderance of the great. Something is heavy. There is a big financial load. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got loads of expenses to deal with. It might not be about that. It might just be about responsibility. It could be that despite all of the help and advice that might be on offer, in the end, it's down to you to make the decisions. It's down to you to decide what to do next. And other people have, they say things, they say they're going to help, but they're just not there. And so you could be left with a financial burden. Again, that burden is not necessarily about things you have to spend money on. That might also be about you having to make decisions. And decide what needs to be done financially, and that could be hard work. But with preponderance of the great, there is the indication here that you are dealing with a heavy burden, but it does seem to be a burden which you are able to carry. Turning to career and business, we have holding together as the first hexagram. Holding together really does indicate that, if possible, you should try to do things with others. You don't have to do everything on your own. So, if you are going into work, there are things you need to do, then don't allow everyone to throw all the responsibility onto you. It shouldn't be like that. And likewise, if you have your own business, it might feel lonely. You have to make decisions, and you don't know whether those decisions are going to work, but you have to do it. But you can get support. Perhaps there are other people in who share your situation, or maybe you need to communicate something, and if you're involved in, I don't know, completing a contract, it's not all down to you. You need to make sure that everyone is on the same wavelength. So absolutely do not think that you do need to do everything on your own. And do give the impression at the same time, whatever you're doing, whether you're in a job, whether you've got a business, even if you've got your own business, even if you're looking for a job, give the impression that you are thinking of the collective. You're thinking of everyone's good. It's not just about you. Selfishness, at least to begin with, will not be appreciated. And maybe this is particularly relevant if you're applying for a job. You don't want to give the impression that you're just desperate for a job and you're going to say anything, whatever it takes to be given the job. You've got to show that you're thinking above and beyond that you're able to think about the community, even if the job appears to be very mundane and doesn't seem to be of wider benefit. It can be of wider benefit. At least you have to give that impression. And holding together is quite a sociable hexagram, and so it does indicate that how things work in career and business, it does depend on who you interact with. And the third line does move, and the third line is often unfortunate, and there is a possibility that you get advice from the wrong people. Or, if you're in a job, you think you want to get some help from someone. You're working in a team, maybe. I mean, not that I know much about teamwork, but if you are working in a team, that first grouping may not work out because you're working with the wrong people, and you have to find other people to work with. You will get there. I mean, the fourth line moves, and you perhaps have to be open about your loyalties, make a decision about who you're going to trust. And if you're if you're open-minded and you're honest with yourself, then you can find the right connections. So don't rush to cooperate with a certain group of people. Keep your options open to an extent. And then this hexagram moves, and it moves to hexagram number 28. And preponderance of the great is about responsibility. There's a lot that has to be done, and it just may feel that the buck stops with you. Other people may have offered help. You thought you were going to get assistance, and in the end, it was only up to a point. You realize that it is down to you to make the decisions. And as far as doing the work is concerned, you may find in the end that you're doing more work than you should be, at least as far as you're concerned. Maybe people are offering help, but in the end, it wasn't there or wasn't good enough, and you might have to carry the burden largely on your own. And it's not something you should complain about or regard it as being unfair. It's just the way it is. And of course, there are advantages being the one carrying the burden, because if other people are trying to carry the burden with you, then they might decide to sort of give up and go home, and you're still going to be left with a huge burden. And you might not understand the situation, and the burden might get dropped because you're over reliant on someone else. But if you know right from the beginning that in the end it's going to be you carrying the weight, then things are going to be a great deal easier for you, and you're not going to be disappointed, and you're not going to suddenly find that you thought it's like you're carrying a huge rock. You think that there are, say, 4 people carrying a rock, and then the other 3 people suddenly run away, and then it's just you carrying the rock. And what are you going to do? Your body's in the wrong position. So it would be better if you knew it was down to you, right from the beginning, because then you'd be adequately prepared. And whatever you needed to transport the rock, whether you needed a trolley or a car or a removal van. I'm talking symbolically here. So that way you can be properly prepared at the end of the movement, at the end of the week, probably the end of the week. So as far as career is concerned, and how you're trying to move things forward, you might get help up to a point, but I think that in the end that help could fade away. And so you just have to be ready for that moment and be relatively philosophical about it, and not get too angry about it. And finally, there is relationships, and holding together is a very relationship orientated hexagram. It's about you and other people, perhaps another person, coming together. It's a shared enterprise, and maybe if you're in a relationship with someone, you expect support from that person, and you need to be open about what you want. You expect them to be open with you, and so don't think that it's all down to you. And relationships are there for you, and so that perhaps is a good way to start with this hexagram, holding together. But do be very clear and transparent about your motives, because in any relationship there may be questions about what are you doing and what do you want. And with the second line moving, it's important that you make this obvious. And this is, of course, especially the case if you're dealing with a new relationship. Now, the third line moves. Now, the third line moving, it may not be relevant if your main concern is an existing relationship, a relationship that has been around for a long time, if that's your main concern. But if you're thinking about new relationships, and I'm not just talking about romance, whatever that relationship is about, coming together with another person, third line. And the message with the third line is the wrong relationship. You could think that you need to be involved with another person to achieve a particular purpose, and the first person you meet, the first person who seems to be on your wavelength, may not work out. And so don't just assume that first person is the be-all and end-all, whatever you're doing, whatever the reason for that relationship. So new relationships could go wrong, perhaps because you're naive, perhaps because you haven't asked enough questions, because you weren't particularly clear about your motives, and they may not have been clear about their motives, and it just could go wrong, and it would be a waste of time, if you spend a lot of time trying to ingratiate yourself with someone and they just turn out to be a bit of a non-starter. Then fourth line moves, and that is a relatively good line. And finally, you can find someone who is on your wavelength and you have a shared interest, and at some stage you might have to sort of declare your loyalty. Or they have to declare their loyalty as well, being open about what you think. And so in the end, openness can work for you. But there could be over the course of a week, it could be very stop start, and certainly if you do meet someone new over the week, don't make assumptions, and you might realize that one person isn't up to it, and then you have to wait for someone else to turn up, and so be patient. And then this hexagram transitions to hexagram number 28, preponderance of the great. And relationships, the important relationships, should not be regarded in a way that is especially casual or trivial. Things can happen, and there may be a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. So if you want to see a relationship through to a successful completion, whatever the completion is, that may be down to you. And it could be hard work. And if you're already involved with someone, then the work falls on your shoulders, and you might just feel that the other person is just not doing enough. But I don't think it's about blame. It just may be the way it is, and just at the moment, the whole issue of relationships, in the end, could be hard work. It's a lot to deal with, and you have to be persistent. Well, if you think the relationship is worth being persistent, but if you can just carry it through, then in the end, you will sort of sort it out. But it just may not be easy, and you might have sort of resentments, feeling it's why isn't the other person doing more? But it's just the way it is for the moment, and this is just a reading for 1 week, and next week will almost certainly be different. So that's it. I hope you have a great week. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.